Hey, what's up, Dev Crew? This is Tyler Lemke, and today we're here with Raymond Gan. He is a very interesting character. I've loved to get to know him better as we've talked and discussed. He is he's a star on LinkedIn, and also he's worked at Disney, IBM, Bird, and miscellaneous other startups. And he's had 10 years of experience in the industry, and he pulls no punches with articles that he writes on LinkedIn about why software boot camps are weak. And today we're going to go into the too long didn't read version before we go into the whole explanatory version of all of the different articles. But this is for if you're a recent graduate from a CS or software engineering program, if you're a self-taught developer, or if you're looking at or going to graduate from a boot camp, this is the video that you need to watch. And Raymond, I'm really glad to have you on. You have a great and interesting background that we'll get to in a bit, but I want you to go over the points of how you can be really competitive for software jobs. Let's get to the too long didn't read version for those people who are just wanting to know.
Sure. Sure. Thank you so much, Tyler, for this chance to talk. Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be here. And this is the number one question that people ask me on LinkedIn and have done for the last 6 years. So I have this in my LinkedIn article called My Ideal Bootcamp. And at the bottom of it, I put a list. Basically, it's a prescription in short form for what anybody can do to stand out for software jobs. This is CS grads and bootcamp grads. The first thing I say is do at least 100 problems, code challenge problems on sites like Codility, HackerRank, Project Euler, or LeetCode, which follow strict Big O time and space standards. Most people, when they practice code challenge problems, they do only 5. And they never do any more. The top 2 sites that I recommend are Codility and HackerRank, because most companies have asked me questions directly from those sites as the first round technical screen. Second thing I tell people to do is write software tests for everything, for the code challenges they do, for the take-home tests, take-home projects that companies give you. Write full tests for that. Again, most new grads never learn to write software tests and never write any tests. So that's the easiest way, if I'm interviewing you, that I can know if you're a pro or not. When I meet people who've never done any tests, I immediately put this person in the amateur category. And then the third step is third advice is read and code from scratch a full software book on your chosen language without peeking. Again, most people never even read even one full book. And most boot camps never tell you to read a book. They only say read a few chapters, stop at chapter 6, and then we have to move on to these other 10 things. However, the thing is, at most of my job interviews, software interviews, they always ask questions from the end of the book, the advanced stuff in the language at the end, which people never study.
Right.
So read a book and code it from scratch, meaning doing all the examples one by one without looking. So that's third. Point number 4 is learn anything by building X from scratch. And again, nobody does that either. So most people will do a tutorial on React. They'll take a React course, which will teach you to build a React site. They'll build a Rails app, right? However, I don't see anyone actually building their own version of React completely from scratch. I don't see people building their own version of Rails completely from scratch. But there are blog posts and tutorials and books on all this stuff. And if someone immediately did that, that person will instantly stand out from the crowd. I would be impressed. You want to do things that will impress other engineers.
Right. So
go ahead. Sorry.
No. So I'll get to it later. Keep going with the points. I'll have some questions for you at the end.
Oh, absolutely. And then the next point is you want to build. So a major problem of student engineers or CS grads or so on is they only have worked on student projects. So basically, all
Right.
students are typically junior engineers. They've only worked on either their own projects or maybe with their classmates worked on a project. But companies don't really care. They want to see that you've worked on real projects that have served real paying customers. So that typically means those are projects written by senior engineers, and most people never do that. So the way to fix that is you go to GitHub, look at popular open source projects, fix bugs, and add features to any popular project on GitHub, which is typically going to be written by a senior engineer, and which typically thousands of people are already using. Don't
Right. And
just do student projects. Go ahead.
right, and you have a link for this, by the way,
Mhm.
which I think is invaluable. So we'll put that in the description below, and it's also in your articles, which we'll link to.
Absolutely. Yeah. On my GitHub, I have a link to something called Awesome for Beginners, which gives you tons of beginner friendly open source projects. If you do that open source project, you can and get your code merged into master. You can put that on your resume and your LinkedIn and talk about and brag about it in interviews, and I will respect you. People like me will instantly respect you more because of that. Okay, next point is, again, the main problem of student developers and junior people is they only work on student projects. How many customers do those student projects have? Zero, right? No one is actually using that for their daily life. So what companies really care about is that you've worked on stuff for real people. And the easiest way to get into that is, just ask your mom, ask your friends, ask like a small business owner that maybe your doctor, maybe a restaurant that you go to. Look at their website and say, hey, say it in a nice way, but you would say like, hey, I've noticed that your website kind of sucks. And probably your doctor or your auto repair shop or whatever that you use, they don't have software engineers, they don't have time or money to spend on that, right? So they usually have a lousy site, and offer them, make a deal with them and say, hey, what do you think if I improve your site for you? Or ask your mom, ask your friends, hey, do you guys actually need something done? Like that's a real problem in your daily life. Let me build it for you. Let's make a deal. And you can negotiate just a little bit of money, for them to pay you like a fixed amount. But the difference, if you actually build a site like that, instead of doing yet another React tutorial, is that guess what? Your customers, now you have customers, and they're going to be super critical. Your mom is not just going to be like your mom anymore. Your mom is going to be like, hey, this doesn't work. This button doesn't work. I actually need this. You see what I mean? And
That's awesome.
if you actually do that, it forces you to get out of the school mode and have to research a ton of stuff that they never teach at the boot camp or at school, but it's actually super valuable and practical. And that's what companies want. So yeah, that's my next point. The next point beyond that is the final point is to make pushing code on GitHub a daily habit. You're basically learning essentially a foreign language. It's like learning Chinese or Spanish. So you could go to the best school in the world. You could go to Harvard and study Chinese, but if you never practice Chinese every day, so what? You're basically useless, right? So that the daily practice is like going to the gym of coding is way more important than what school you went to or.
It's
Yeah.
such a big deal. I've seen that over and over again. I've seen a lot of people whose GitHub I go to. Hey, I'm a perpetrator of this too. I don't push every day. I need to do better. But I see people that are bootcamp grads and it's like 6 months in and they haven't got their job yet and they don't have any commits since they graduated. It's like, what are you doing?
Absolutely. And I linked to this lady named Jennifer DeWalt. This was several years ago, jenniferdewalt.com, DEWALT. She was an artist in San Francisco, no technical background at all. She said, hey, I'm going to teach myself to code. She didn't go to a boot camp, didn't take a course, but she set herself a strict goal and deadline. She said, I'm going to build one website a day for 180 days. And I'm
Wow.
going to blog about it. And she actually did it. Can you imagine? So
That's amazing.
right? And as she was teaching herself JavaScript, so she taught herself JavaScript, HTML, CSS, Ruby, Rails, all this basic stuff. And as she was learning new things, she would make a new website that day to practice that new concept. So what people don't understand is it doesn't have to be like a full-blown, enterprise site. No, you could just do a tiny little thing to show one idea. And because she's an artist, she made it cute and funny. She had like things like, click here. She made like a Monty Hall, like a let's make a deal kind of game show site where it's like you have 3 doors and you click one of the doors to see what's behind it. Just illustrate one principle a day. But the point is, when she did this and blogged about everything she did, she got tons of response. Like all the tech blogs were blogging about her. She got like national attention in the tech blog world. And of course, companies are going to be interested in you because even though you're a beginner, you prove that you can set and meet deadlines, daily deadlines, and that's more important than anything else. And you can teach yourself.
Right. So I've got some follow-up questions. I wanted to have you get that stuff out there. I've got a few follow-up questions.
Sure.
So do you expect everyone to do all these things? Because like I think I see this list and I'm like, dude, I don't have enough time in the day to do all this stuff, right? I don't have enough time to do all this stuff, and I'm sure most of you out there might feel the same. Can you elaborate on a response to that?
Absolutely. So first of all, I have not done most of these things. I've only done parts of different things. So I know I don't have time to do everything either. However, this is an ideal for people. And the reason I make the standard so high in my list is because this is what will instantly grab people's attention. Like if I saw you had done even one of these things on my list, this would immediately attract me to your profile, and I'd want to talk to you. I'd want to interview you. And the thing is, in 6 years since I graduated from my boot camp, so I went to Flatiron School in New York, in the 6 years since then, I've pretty much not seen a single person do any of these things.
So so you're saying people that don't write tests during interview, people don't write tests during their interview questions. So you're saying people don't do that, or?
I'm not saying to write during the interview. I'm just saying when they're practicing, when they're building their own projects, they're typically not writing tests.
They're not writing tests and they're not bragging about them inside of their resumes or whatever that you look at.
I mean, you don't have to brag about it. Just if I look at your code, I want to see you have tests. Most people have never written a single test. And most people have never read an entire book. Just one book. Just read one book and cover it in software. Most people never even do that, right? Most people never work on open source projects, and they've never merged any code to a popular project.
So just any of these things can make you stand out. That's what I'm seeing is you're wanting to stand out.
Absolutely.
By being competitive, it's saying, hey, you are unique and different from N million other people applying for these jobs, and we'll get into that in a bit. But
absolutely. So I'm not saying yes, you have to do everything. Of course, it's going to be hard, and I haven't done everything. But one thing I have done is I have done 100 problems, code challenge problems from Codility and Project Euler. So yeah, if you just do that, if you can just do 100 problems that are difficult, I don't mean like the easy problems from HackerRank. Do the mid to hard problems from HackerRank, do 50 problems from Project Euler, do 50 problems from Codility. That immediately will make you stand out from thousands of other people, and I would already be impressed.
Awesome. This is really, really good advice. I'm really excited to dig into this more. But let's switch over now into let's hear about your background, because I didn't start off with this, and I should have in the intro. But you have had 5 different careers so far.
Yeah.
How did you get into software, and what are these different careers that you've done? And can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure, thank you. And I always tell people that it's a sign that I'm really good at deciding on what to do in life. Clearly, right? So I was a rebellious person, I didn't want to listen. I'm not a typical Asian who's like always following their parents. I rebelled against my parents and didn't listen to them. I made my own decisions. And it's interesting because so my 5 careers are: first, I was a chemical engineer. That was my degree from Berkeley. Then I did switch to software, but actually didn't have a good experience the first time. And then then I became a teacher, a private tutor for rich teenagers and college kids. Then I changed to spinal surgery and became a neurophysiologist working on back and neck surgeries. Then I switched back to software. So this is actually my second time in software, believe it or not.
Wow, that's more than I think most people ever dream of doing in their lifetime. So that's
Yeah,
awesome. But
it's insane.
so how did you get into software originally? Did you touch on that yet? Like,
Oh
when did you
no,
first get into it?
yeah. So, well, I was one of those people who was like really into math and science, but also literature since I was a kid, and the arts. I liked everything basically, um, and I was pretty advanced in math since I was a child. But I started coding probably when I was like 12 or so, probably junior high. And then I kind of did it on and off. So I started with BASIC. I did Pascal. I did Fortran, stuff like that. This is all like kind of on my own as a teenager. And then when I grew up in Silicon Valley. I'm from Cupertino, where Apple is. And the thing is, again, being a rebellious person, I didn't want to follow everyone else because I knew so many people who were going to computer science. And at that time, I believed like the negative stereotype of software people. And I was like, that's not me. I was like, I'm not introverted. I'm not socially awkward. I don't, all these bad things that you think about software people. I'm like, that's not me. So it actually dissuaded me. And I said, I don't want to do computer science. I deliberately didn't want to do it because I'm like, that's not my personality. So instead, I became a chemical engineer because I wanted to work on environmental problems. I wanted to work on pollution. However, what I realized at Berkeley was that most of us they were training us to go work for oil and chemical companies. They were training us to pollute. And that's because that's where most of the money is. It's not in environmental protection. It's in damaging the environment. So I refused to do that. And I originally went into semiconductors after college. And
Cool.
then after that, so a major reason that I did a lot of switching was honestly I got bored, and in the chemical engineering field, it's very old, it's very bureaucratic, it's very expensive. You use like I was working with $4 million pieces of equipment, so every idea you have, everything you want to change is very slow and very expensive, and there's lots of bureaucracy, right? And I was using textbooks that were like 10, 15 years old that hadn't changed.
So it wasn't your speed.
Yeah, and also you're limited in where you can live and what types of companies you can work for. So you can't live in an exciting city like New York or San Francisco or LA. Typically, those companies, it's usually manufacturing or chemical, semiconductor processing. So they put them, because they cost billions of dollars to build the factory, they put them in like the most boring places, far away from the major city, because it's cheap.
Right, exactly. Well,
So,
thanks for that background info. So, um,
wait, I just wanted to quickly say, so then I switched from there to software. I took a few CS classes, switched to software, worked for some companies like IBM. Then I became a teacher, private tutor, taught for a lot of educational companies, teaching mostly rich high school students, and the types of students that were caught in the college admissions scandal. Like those are my students.
oh really?
Yeah, the private, the ones who went to expensive private schools in Silicon Valley and LA, for example. Yeah, and I love teaching. And then I switched to spinal surgery because I thought at that time, oh, engineering is not for me. I didn't have a good experience the first 2 times. The first time I was in software, I was working for a very bureaucratic old company, and everything was very slow. And I felt like a number. I felt just like I wasn't valued at all. And I decided, I want to do something where I'm more of a people person. I can help people more directly. So I switched from there into surgery. And I wasn't a doctor. I was a neurophysiologist. So I worked on over 400 surgeries at over 50 hospitals with over 50 surgeons in 7 states.
Wow.
And yeah, and that's a long story. I don't want to take up too much time. That's another crazy story. That's how I originally moved to LA, was for surgery.
That's another LinkedIn article we'll see in the future.
It's
right?
another story. And then the thing is, after a while, I realized, I didn't want to be a doctor. I was actually, again, I was really bored. It's not because my favorite part of that job was helping patients and meeting patients. However, that was only the first 15 minutes of the surgery, because I would meet people initially like 6:30 a.m., right, when they were wheeled in to the hospital, and I would joke around with them, talk to them and their families, and put electrodes on them. But then after that, we'd move them into the operating room, and we'd put them under anesthesia, and they would just be a slab of meat on the table for 4 to 6 hours. And it became very repetitive. Basically, my job, I wasn't a doctor. I was basically a security guard for the nervous system. I was there to monitor their nerve signals. I would stick 20 needles into people, into their scalp and upper and lower body, and shock them with electricity and make them jump on the table like this, like Frankenstein's monster, for like 6 hours while the surgeon was chopping away. And
oh my goodness.
And I would watch their nerve signals on the screen for 6 hours. And make sure the surgeon wasn't paralyzing them, wasn't injuring the nerves.
Wow.
So it sounds cool, but again, it got really boring and repetitive after.
Same thing. You mastered it.
Yeah. And I was like, honestly, I don't want to be a doctor. I miss engineering. I want to do something that can affect millions of people, and that's that's creative. Surgery is not creative at all. Basically, my job was to make sure everything was very boring. If it's boring, it's good. So finally, I switched to surgery, back to computer science. While I was still in the operating room, I started reading computer science websites, and don't worry, nobody died. And that's how. And boot camps were just starting to come out then. This was like 2012, and then 2013 was when I started like seriously getting into software again, studying. So.
That's awesome. So you've worked at various different companies now. You've worked at. You want to touch on the different companies you've worked at? I know you list them, or do you want to go over those at the end with your LinkedIn profile and stuff?
I'll just if you see, basically I've worked for both Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, but as well as like IBM and Disney, but also a bunch of startups. Currently, I work at Bird, which is, I guess, the fastest growing company in history. But I've also worked on a lot of short-term projects and contracts as well. So overall, I've worked on in a lot of different industries, whether it's like cars or cosmetics or television or food, or wine or now scooters. So it's been pretty amazing.
Been there, done that with all the different industries, right? So
yeah.
So you have these 5 articles on LinkedIn, and you often refer to them. That's part of the reason why we're doing this video today, right? Because you want to get this information out there and be able to show people in a different format kind of the information that's in these articles. And you cover everything from your LinkedIn, how to like have an awesome LinkedIn profile, to what your perfect bootcamp would look like. So I wanted to go over these articles. I've read through most of them, and we pulled out some high level points here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start off with the first one. How are sorry, I can't speak right now. How are coding boot camps weak? So that's not the title of your article, but that's the main concept, right? So.
Oh, that is the title. Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So how are coding boot camps weak? Do do you want to go over the different points here, and maybe I can ask you some follow-up questions as those come through?
Absolutely. So after my boot camp, which was Flatiron School in New York, I was in the 4th class of Flatiron in Manhattan. I thought, I was feeling good about myself. I was maybe a little bit overconfident because I was the second person in my class to get a job, and I got a job 5 days after graduation, really fast. So I thought, hey, I'm getting things, I'm getting there. I know what I'm doing. And then I actually got hired by a consulting firm in New York. And the first day of the job, my boss asked me to write a test in Minitest, which is a Ruby test framework. And guess what? I had no idea what to do. I'd never written any tests at all. So just to set up Minitest took forever, and I was so embarrassed. You would think like because he would ask me this as like, this is like your alphabet. This is like, it's like, do you know how to tie your shoes? And I couldn't even do that, and I felt so lame. So throughout working at this consulting firm, I started seeing all these little things where I was slower than everyone else, where everyone else like took it for granted, and we had never covered it in the boot camp at all. So I eventually wrote this article, How Are Quitting Bootcamps Weak, to describe basically how I was weak. This is me. These are the 6 areas where I didn't know after my boot camp, and which I'm warning everyone, please study up on this stuff before you finish the boot camp, so you're not as ill prepared as I was in my first job. So what are the 6 things? The first thing I didn't know well enough was fundamental computer science. Knowing common data structures and algorithms, the big O time space complexity of each, and how and when to use them. It's about knowing basic internet protocols and standards like HTTP, OAuth 2, LDAP, TCP. They never teach that usually at the boot camp either. So how do you fix this problem? Let me just go over basically what the 6 things are, and then I'll go into more detail. Okay. So the first thing is knowing basic computer science, data structure and algorithms, and knowing basic internet protocols and web standards. Most bootcamp grads don't know this. Secondly, knowing the fundamentals of your own computer language. Even
Right.
that. Yeah, surprisingly, yeah, a lot of people don't know how to do things in just plain Ruby or JavaScript, but they have to rely on gems, libraries, or frameworks to get it done. And so there's the example. I'll give the quick example where I interviewed this person who had been at my first job in Santa Monica, who had been I think worked as a product manager before at a startup here, had a Stanford MBA, and we were
Wow.
like, holy crap, yeah. And my boss was so excited. Was like, wow, we're probably gonna get her, and we would love to have another woman on the team. My boss was a woman, like great. So I interview her, and I was excited. So I interview her. I asked her one question from Project Euler, and she didn't know how to write a basic loop in Ruby, and she had gone to General Assembly, and she was selling herself as a Ruby developer, but couldn't write a basic loop. She had to look it up. And I was like, wow. I mean, we're not expecting people to know all the syntax of everything, but if you don't know how to write a loop, that tells me that you've barely written any loops, right? Like how much experience have you even had or practiced? And with my actual interview question, she couldn't. Typically, when you ask an interview question or when you get interview questions, there are 2 stages. There's like you have to first, people are checking to see, can you just solve it the brute force way? In other words, the slow way, right? The dumb way. Can you solve it the dumb way?
That's usually what I try to get, because I'm
right?
still not good at this stuff.
Yeah, the engineer is looking at that. The company is saying, can you just do it the dumbest way possible, get it done? And then if you can do that, then they'll say, okay, great. Now let's do it the fast way. how do you optimize this? That's going to be part 2. And if you can do both, fantastic. You've passed the interview, right? But if you can't even do step 1, do the dumb way, you're out. You're instantly rejected. And
Right.
this person, this Stanford MBA grad, could not even do the first way. So anyway, so fundamentals of your computer language. I see too many people, too many boot camps stressing React, Rails, but they don't stress basic Ruby or basic JavaScript. And that becomes very obvious when you ask them basic questions on the language. So instantly, when you do that, typically people will reject you. Third is people don't know how to write good software tests. Most people I meet from boot camps and from CS programs have never written a software test in their life. Not one.
Yeah.
Maybe the boot camp will give them tests and say write code to pass the test, but they never write their own tests. And actually at work, I typically find that it's actually harder and it takes longer and takes more code to write tests than to write the original code that I'm testing. So it actually takes more thought. You have to think more like a senior person to write, because when you're writing your original code, you're just thinking of you're thinking of the happy path. You're thinking of, this is one way to this code, I want it to work. And you're only thinking of the perfect case, right? But when you write tests, you're actually a pessimist. You're like a lawyer, and you're thinking, okay, what are all the 10 ways this thing could go wrong? And you're actually accounting for that. And you're thinking, oh, what if the internet connection dies? What if they enter negative numbers? What if this goes wrong? And you have to handle all that in your test and account for it. So that's a sign of a more mature developer, you see? Right. And again, people never write tests. So if you do that, that instantly makes you stand out. I've actually written tests in the middle on a whiteboard before, and people will be like, oh no, you don't have to write tests, it's fine. And maybe we don't have time to do it. But the fact that I even try, that already impresses them.
That's smart. That's awesome. Yeah, I like that idea.
So if you can write tests from your head, from scratch, without looking, and that's just part of your normal process, that will really impress people. It's a sign of a senior developer. Next step is most people don't know principles of good object-oriented design. So, because what does that mean, right?
Yeah, what does that mean? So elaborate on it.
Well,
I can think of some myself, but I'd like to know what you think about that.
Yeah, like boot camps never really teach that. They just teach, just get the code working. As long as it works, it's cool, right? We don't care how it's designed, but at a company, people do care. And in my first consulting job after Flatiron School, my boss would keep rejecting my code. He was very picky, and he'd say, yeah, it's fine that it works, but no, you have no tests, and your objects are too tightly coupled together. I'd say, what does that mean? And he'd say, go read the book Practical Object-Oriented Design in Ruby by Sandy Metz. She talks about all that. And I never had a chance to read it while I was working at that job. But after I left that job, I read it. So you see what I mean? So yeah, it's things like the solid principles, SOLID, the solid principles of object-oriented design. And most people don't know what those are and can't give examples for them.
Right. And they're really important to help you not have spaghetti code, basically. Help you to reduce complexity and increase code quality, right?
Yeah, and also code reusability. People don't think that we're actually writing stuff, widgets that are going to be interchangeable parts for other engineers on your team and for yourself. 3 months from now, you're writing this function or this class or whatever. You want to make it so everyone on your team can pick it up, stick this building block somewhere else, and be able to build on top of it. And another thing is I gave the example. Here's an example. Let's say you're writing a blackjack program, which I had to do in my very first online training. They say, write a blackjack program. Great. Okay, so I write a blackjack program, let's say in the console. It's just text-based. But then What if a few months from now, your company says, great, this blackjack program is selling like hotcakes, but now we want to put it on the web. Someone's going to pay us a bunch of money to put it on the web. Are you going to rewrite the whole program from scratch? No. You want to rewrite as little as possible and adapt it for the web, right? And now they say, oh, now we want it on iOS. Now we want it on Android. And oh, now we want it for virtual reality. Now we want it on Xbox. And now, like, there's a casino in Vegas. They're making physical, blackjack machine, and they want to use our code for that. Can you adapt it for that too? So you see what I mean? It's like you want to write it so that your design is predicting something is so interchangeable that 5 years from now, in some unknown business case, someone could still use your code. That's how hard it is.
And it takes time to get there, but
Absolutely.
But you need to know about those principles and start working towards it, right? That's your point, right?
Exactly. So that you make it so interchangeable, so like decoupled, so clean, easy to read, whatever, that even after you leave the company, engineers can look at your code 4 years later and be like, oh, cool, I know exactly what it was doing. I can fit these blocks together for our intergalactic blackjack program now in 4 dimensions. I can still use Raymond's code as a foundation. You see, that's what good design means, and it takes years to get that kind of experience and judgment. But the point is, most bootcamp grads and CS grads never even think about it.
Right. Let's keep on moving on because we have a lot of other stuff to cover too.
Sure. The other things are how to do technical interviews well, and I can talk a lot about that. But again, if I were doing it, I would say start practicing technical interviews starting week 1 of your program. I would have the students do 2 interviews a week. But boot camps never do that. They always say, or CS programs never do that, right? They always make that as an afterthought.
Right.
They'll say, after we do all of our courses, the final week, okay, here's some material. Go look at these sites.
And no one's going to do it,
Yeah, and then you're on your own. Then you're basically abandoned. But why do that? You should instead be practicing from week 1 and
week 0.
Yeah, absolutely. And just get used to articulating, speaking about your problems, how you break down problems. Okay, and then next step is how to understand and dive into a senior engineer's complex project. That's what I meant about doing open source projects. Because writing code is like it's like being a writer, like a writer of literature, of English. And how do we become good English writers? We don't just read our own essays, right? No. We don't just read our classmates' essays. We read like the best writers in the English language.
Yeah.
And we read the best newspapers, and then we copy their tricks. We steal them, we analyze them, and then we try to be like them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good metaphor. I like that.
I don't see schools teaching this. They don't say, and when I was starting again at my first company after my boot camp, my boss actually told me, he said, because I was a Ruby on Rails developer, and he said, do you know how I learned Rails? He said, I actually download the entire source code of Rails and I fix bugs in Rails. Like, I mean,
that's insane.
He's that good. He could do that. Okay.
That's awesome.
But he actually gave me an assignment. He said, okay, now I have a task for you. There's an actual bug in this module in Rails called active support, and it doesn't do this and this. Go download all of Rails, clone all of Rails on your computer, look at the issues in GitHub for this specific bug, see what people have done to try to fix it, and go fix it. Go fix the bug and write tests for it and show me what you did. So he didn't have me do it like to really merge with Rails, right? But just as practice.
Right.
And again, most people never look at the source code of major, like they're learning React, but they never actually try to fix bugs in React or go to that level of depth.
Right. Do you think part of that is like, because I get overwhelmed when I start looking at other code and just the amount of overhead it takes to start to understand some of those things. Like, do you think do you think most people could get there? Maybe this talks to the speed of the programs too. Is that these programs crank people out in 12 weeks, right? Is it
Yeah.
even possible to get to that level in 12 weeks unless you're working 100-hour weeks? I mean, even then.
Yeah, it doesn't feel realistic to me either. I tend to like the programs that are longer, that are at least 6 months. And definitely before my program, I had to work. I already worked for several months on my own, studying. I'd already gone through a month of an online boot camp called Launch School, and I'd already been an engineer for 3 years in the past, so I wasn't new to software at all. Plus, I've been coding since I was 12. I'm not a typical boot camp grad. Um, but yeah, I want to say absolutely. I think the major problem just with any boot camp is the fact that there's a schedule. That's the major problem, or with school in general, is the fact that you have to learn things on a schedule.
So
And
so launch school, is that the one that they don't have set milestones?
no, they have set milestones, but they don't have a schedule. Like they, well, I don't know how it is now because it's been several years since I was there. But and I have a link about this in my article. But they favor what's called mastery-based learning, and
Right.
yeah, which means like they're very against the idea of scheduling learning in 12 weeks because everyone goes at their own pace, right? Some people can
Right.
take a month to learn recursion. So their point is never move on from that topic unless you really understand it.
Yeah,
Take
I
as
actually
much time as you need.
I actually read about them. That's fascinating. I think we could go off for hours just onto that mastery-based learning stuff, but something I think people should check out.
Absolutely. And I have a link in my article, The Ideal Bootcamp, at the bottom to Launch School, the Mastery Based. Just look up Launch School Mastery Based Learning. You'll see what I mean. But that's typically the problem I see when I talk to people who go to General Assembly, for example. They'll say, oh, I spent 3 weeks on Ruby, 3 weeks on JavaScript, 3 weeks on Rails. And I'm like, okay. And they're like, well, I'm already forgetting about Ruby now. Because it's like I've been taking a tour of Europe and I've spent like one day in Rome, one day in Paris, and I forgot everything. So
Yeah,
what's the point?
yeah, there's an interesting thing I want to go over with that in a little bit as well. But
Yeah,
should we move on? Let's move on to
sure.
the boot camp grabs and the cutthroat reality of becoming a software engineer. So I think we could go a long time about your background with Flatiron. I don't know. I think we should kind of skip a lot of that,
Sure.
uh, unless you think it'll be really valuable. But and we already went over the story of the student who said no, actually talk about this one. So you asked, talk about the story of the student who asked, how do I run a Ruby program?
Oh, so this was so Flatiron will they will do mock interviews. They'll have experienced engineers do some mock interviews of their grads in week 12 of the program, the final week. And like I went through this when I was at Flatiron, but then later on I got hired by a company called Skilled, which does that. They had me interview new grads or imminent grads from Dev Bootcamp and from Flatiron School. And sadly, the Dev Bootcamp grads were really mediocre, and I'm not surprised that Dev Bootcamp went out of business. But Flatiron School grads were kind of hit and miss. Some were really excellent, and I was really impressed. And I would ask them an interview question, and they did really well. A few of them actually told me, I said, write some code and run it in Ruby. Just that, right? And they'd been studying Ruby the whole time, I would think. And some of them told me, how do I run a Ruby program again? I'm like, what? I'm like, what have you been doing for 12 weeks?
Right.
And
So
they,
this was a main language of their course, right?
yeah, Flatiron focuses on Ruby. Like that's been their whole thing, right? I'm sure now they've switched a bit to JavaScript, but that's been the thing for the whole time. And I'm like, and they'd never, a few of these students had never independently run a Ruby program.
So they ran some script that ran their Ruby program for them or something.
Well, they said that Flatiron would give them software tests written in RSpec, and then they would write code to pass the test. So they would run RSpec. You know,
But not the program.
they would run the test code, yeah, and they never like independently. I'm like, are you serious? Like, so it's little things. Well, this goes into another thing, which I'll talk more about later, but which is about like, and I've posted about this on LinkedIn, which is about cultural fit, and I'll go more about that. But the point is like, we software engineers, we're watching you. We're watching little things about you as you're talking during the interview, right?
Uh-huh.
And we want to see, and I tell people you have to be like a spy. It's like, let's say you have to pretend like you're French or you're Russian or you're in another country, but you don't want to give away that you're not, that you didn't grow up there. You see what I mean?
Right.
And we subconsciously do this. We're not like obviously looking for these things, but there are little things that you can say or do or code that will instantly give you away as a foreigner, as someone who's never lived there, right? And something like this, like, I don't know how to run a program. Yeah, instantly I would reject you.
That's a dead giveaway right there, huh?
Right, or people who don't know basic Unix commands. I've met people like that. Like they don't know how to do ls. You know, they know how to list files in show the directory in Unix. They've only used a GUI for everything. That tells
Right.
me you have no experience, and I would never hire you.
Right.
So yeah.
So I don't know if you want to cover any other points in here. I'm going over you used to mentor people on Code Mentor that were graduates. Can you talk a little bit about that? These graduates of these boot camps that you had to mentor. Why were you mentoring them?
Oh, because they were paying me.
Right.
So yeah, yeah. So I was on a site called Code Mentor for 2 years, and it was for different companies, and people could post projects there, and we could bid to work on them. It was just people around the world. So I helped different people in London, Australia, New York, San Francisco, whatever. And some of the people, and I would charge by the minute. So I usually charge, I don't know, like $1 a minute. And some of the people who were on their Code Mentor had already graduated from a boot camp and were looking for jobs unsuccessfully. So they hired me to see what was wrong or to help them out. Some unfortunately had been looking for 6 months or longer and with no success. And I would ask them, okay, so you say you're, let's say, a JavaScript expert. Can you write a function in JavaScript? And they would say, I haven't done JavaScript for like 3 months now, and actually I thought it would help my chances to switch to learning Swift. So I've been like doing Swift. And I'm like, what? Why? Like, you just spent all this effort and went through a boot camp to do JavaScript, and now you're doing iOS programming? Like, that makes no sense. And you see what I mean? People think mistakenly that, oh, the more languages I can put on my resume, the better. But no. They want depth. Companies want depth, not breadth. And if you can't write a basic function in JavaScript from your head, again, that tells me it's a dead giveaway. You've barely ever used JavaScript.
Right.
So I would meet people like that, and I would tell them, I'm sorry, but I feel like you should ask for a refund. You basically wasted your money.
Wow. That's really
Yeah.
that's really something. So another point you covered on was most boot camps don't tell you that a tech company may only hire 1% of all the applications for a software engineering job. And I'd say I've heard, I actually have a video on
less than 1%.
Oh yeah, it's less than 1% because I believe right now the average is 250 per posting. of applicants, and that's generally speaking. I don't know what it is for software engineering type jobs, but
Yeah.
that's one of the latest statistics I've heard. So, and you're saying how they leave the job vacant for months until they find the right fit. So
Yeah.
why are companies waiting to hire the right fit person? Why can't they just hire someone and train them?
Because bottom line, because they lose money. It's about money. So uh, now it depends on the type of company, of course. If you're talking like a big, slow, bureaucratic company, they can afford to lose money a little bit and hire more junior people. But a startup, definitely no. That's why I always tell new grads it's easier to get a job at a big, slow, not sexy, bureaucratic company, a company that most people aren't jumping to work at. Go for that if you're looking for your first job. Don't always try to get into Google or Facebook or the hot startups like Bird, for example, because everyone is applying to them. You have several hundred applications for each job, or maybe
There's
thousands.
probably thousands for those companies, I imagine. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? The point is, if it's famous, people are a lot of people are already applying for it. So you want to go to a less famous, less sexy, less less hot company. Um, yeah, and again, nobody talks about this, but yeah, that's typically what I see. Less than 1%. You have to be because people will object. They'll say, "Wait, are you saying you have to be like a genius?" No, you don't have to be a genius to get a job, but you do have to be better than the at least 100 other people who are applying for that job with you.
Right,
So
you
you
have to
have.
be the best person who applied for the job, basically.
I mean, yeah, yeah, exactly,
Well,
and
and there's
and
culture fit and stuff like that like it, whether you're a good person and you're not, if you clash with the team because you're
yeah,
whatever, not a nice person, right? That could be a problem, but you
but
have to be
but
the best person that applies.
but what I'm telling people is like, because a lot of bootcamp grads, they'll think, or university students, they'll think, oh, I'm the best student in my class, right? I'm like, okay, class of how many people? Like 30 people? Like, big deal. Because people don't see the scale of competition for a software job. You're not just competing against the best people in Los Angeles, you're competing against the best people worldwide sometimes. It's international. Um, and yeah, every job will have hundreds of people, like let's say at least 100. You have to assume at least 100 people applying for it. So you have to honestly evaluate yourself and say, right now, would I hire myself over 100 other people? And if you don't think you really, like, put yourself in the boss's position, would you actually pay for yourself to do that job over 100 other people? If not, you should keep studying. That's all I say. You don't have to be a genius. I'm not trying to discourage people, but I'm trying to be realistic. And the other thing I want to say is, like, one of the startups I worked for in the past, I in 5 months, I guess the first 5 months I was there, I was the only new engineer we hired in LA. Only me. However, we hired maybe 20 other engineers in that time. But guess what? They were all overseas. So we hired engineers in Argentina, Brazil, Ukraine, even Nigeria, even Africa, right? All for cheaper salaries. The average software engineer in Europe, or like in the UK, let's say, gets paid 50% of what we get paid in LA.
Wow.
Yeah, they make half of our salary in LA. Maybe in India, they'll make 1/3 of what we make in LA, right? Latin America, I don't know. But all these colleagues that I worked with all on my team were all somewhere else in another country. They all spoke English. They all were really good coders. They all were senior people. You're competing against those people. It's not just LA. It's not just New York. That's why it's hard, you see? And
Right.
people don't get that.
Yeah, and I'd like to touch on something for a second too. You
Yeah.
recently wrote you pull no punches on LinkedIn, so I like I
Sure.
like that about you. I don't know if I agree with this, but I thought I'd bring it up and get your point of view on it. Okay, so you
Sure.
said you've been you're a critic of um, whether there's actually a job shortage out in the market. I remember reading something that you posted on this, and you said this is a farce. I'll let you speak for yourself, but can you tell me more about that? Why you think there's not actually this huge job shortage that companies are and colleges are and boot camps are purporting?
Oh, no, I mean, there is a job shortage of but it's always for senior people, and that's
Okay.
true. That's true in many fields, right?
Okay, cool. So
Yeah, yeah,
you're saying there's not you're saying you're saying that that maybe they're not telling the whole truth by saying, "Hey, there's a million we're a million jobs short right now," or whatever the new statistic is. You're
yeah,
saying it's a million jobs short of mid or senior or,
yeah.
lead developers. It's not entry level developers they're looking for.
Absolutely. So I'll give an example actually from a different field, from nursing. Okay, if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but back in, I don't know, 10 years ago, it was very hot to leave your school, you leave your current career and jump into nursing. If you
I think I
remember,
remember that.
right?
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, and at that time, I was actually part of that. That's at the time when I was getting into surgery and healthcare. So many people I knew were like, okay, and I was in community. I went back to community college at that time, and I was taking biology and all the pre-med courses at the time. And I was around a lot of people who had left business and other stuff to go into nursing. Why is that? Because all the news kept saying there's a shortage, and anybody who graduates from anywhere will get a job. And at that time, it was true. Like you could just go to a 2-year associate's degree, didn't matter where you went, you could quickly get a nursing job, a basic RN job. And people would often then move to San Francisco or the Bay Area, where I was from, because that's where the highest paid nurses in the country were. The highest paid nurses were in San Francisco and the Bay Area. Okay. So everyone was moving over there. Well, guess what? Just like the normal, as happens with all the basic rules of economics, supply and demand happens to nursing too. And after a couple years or so, that wasn't true anymore. So I would meet people who had gone to associate's degrees, could not find a job in nursing. I would be in the medical clinic, getting my blood drawn, and I'd meet the medical assistant there, and she'd be like, "Yeah, I have a nursing degree, but I can't find a nursing job, so I'm working here in the clinic, doing this lower level job." And when I worked in surgery, I worked with a lot of nurses, but guess what? They were all senior nurses typically. They'd been working for 10, 15 years. I didn't see a lot of young nurses. I'm like, are your hospitals hiring? They say, yeah, but only senior nurses. So the point is, in nursing, the same thing happened where it was like, at first, yeah, it was super hot. Everyone could get a job. And then it became, oh, you have to have a bachelor's degree in nursing. And then it became, oh, you have to go to one of the top bachelor's programs in the country. And then it became, oh, and you have to have a master's degree. You see what happens? Supply and demand. And so
Okay.
the same thing in software, right? It's like right now, the last several years, everyone has been jumping into software because it's hot, right? And maybe before, like the first few people who could learn Swift, when Swift first came out, could easily get jobs. And now it's like, so what? People have been doing Swift for enough time. There are many people who have years of experience in Swift. So as a new person, you're not going to be able to compete with them. So
So
it's the same supply and demand situation.
so you're saying that
But,
people aren't looking for warm bodies anymore to fill these seats,
so
basically.
I'll tell you a story that will illustrate it. So I graduated from Flatiron School in 2013, okay? And then after my first consulting firm job, I moved back to LA, and I was asking a recruiter in LA, "Hey, this is my background. Can you help me find a job in LA?" You know what he told me? This was in 2014, 5 years ago. He thought a minute and said, "Why don't you just forget about California? Maybe you should just look in Oregon or Washington." And I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Do you know how many resumes I have from bootcamp grads right now? I have over 100." And this was 5 years ago he said that. Of course, I completely ignored what he said. And I still, worked in California anyway. But, even back then, there was already the beginning signs of saturation, right? And boot camps had just come out. They had been out for 1 or 2 years. And LA at that time had only one boot camp, which was General Assembly. But now, if you look on Course Report, which lists all the boot camps, LA has over 30 boot camps. And if you do the math, let's say you're producing whatever, maybe it's like 1,500 new boot camp grads every few months into the LA market, right? And if you look on AngelList, there are, let's say there are 300 startups in LA, or let's be generous, let's say 500 startups in LA. First of all, most startups refuse to hire any junior people at all or any new grads because they can't afford them. But let's be generous and say every single one of 500 startups will hire at least one bootcamp grad, right? You're still producing 1,500 new bootcamp grads every 3 months into the market. What happens to the other 2/3? So
they either need to go other places in the country or go into other roles, maybe QA roles, we won't go down that path of whether that's a good idea or not. But yeah, they're gonna have to find something else, right?
Yeah, but it's just basic math. So my point is the junior market, and I want everyone to. I don't want to discourage people, but I want to say the reality. The junior software market has been saturated for years.
Yeah, and I found it really hard to find a job, and I'll tell you, it was further on in my search, but I remember going into one interview, and I'm not very good at the technical interview side, and this guy said, it's only you and one other person that was any good, and the other person got picked in front of me, right? So I was the second person in line, but it felt good, but I was also like, I don't feel like I'm that great. And so it's like there must be a lot of unqualified people out there too, like just applying to these jobs like crazy. So
yeah, and that's why I said, unfortunately, I had a post where I know it got people upset, but I was saying, the reality from what I've seen is that, including since Flatiron, was that often if you had a prior engineering, science, math, computer science background, you had the advantage over other people. Of course, right? It's kind of like a logical thing you would think. And then other people who were coming in from other fields had a sort of a disadvantage. I would say the people who have really good writing and speaking skills, who have good humanities skills, English, history, politics, political science, they also may have an advantage because that can translate well into, because software engineering is basically you're being a writer. So anyone who's a good writer, who's a linguist, who's picky about language has an advantage with foreign languages and so on. But I'm saying everyone else who has no background, maybe who worked at Starbucks before, because I've met all kinds of people. I've talked to all kinds of people who are ex-military. They worked at Walmart. They worked at the post office. They worked at the hair salon, car sales, like all these other people jumping into software. I'm sorry, but they're going to have a tougher time and have a much bigger hurdle to overcome to prove that they fit. And that's the reality. And I tell them, you have to be careful if you're making that leap. You have to budget at least for 1 to 2 years of unemployment when you're making the transition. Yeah, because that's what I've seen on average. Because think about it. It takes how many months to start studying? Let's say you're brand new. You've never done any software in your life, right? You're gonna spend at least 3 months studying on your own because you have to do pre-work. You have to do whatever Code Academy, right? That's at least that's at least 3 months or more. And then now you're going to go to a boot camp. That's at least 3 months. So that's already 6 months or more. And then afterwards, people are now, before maybe it used to take 3 months to get a job. Now it's maybe taking 6 months on average to get a job, So add 6 more months to that. That's already 1 year. And that's in the best case, right? Like one of my friends who now works at Yelp, very, very cool guy. He has a business degree. He used to work at Abercrombie and Fitch. And he works really hard, and I helped him. I studied with him, and I gave him, my tips and tricks. From the time he started doing software till the time he went to App Academy in San Francisco, which is one of the best boot camps, and I highly recommend App Academy. He went through that. After that, it still took him 6 months to find a job in San Francisco at Yelp. He got a internship at Yelp, and then he did well the internship, and now since then has been a software engineer at Yelp. So he did
Wow.
well. But the whole process to get from when he first started doing software and when he got the job at Yelp, 2 years.
To get his internship.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's crazy. And he went through a really good boot camp.
Yeah, and this is one guy who went to one of the top boot camps in the country, which I like better than Flatiron. And I was helping him, like I was his friend, and we were studying.
Right. So he had a mentor. He had a mentor that way.
Yeah, I was giving him the advice that I give in my articles, and we were doing code challenge problems together and all that. It still took him 6 months to find the internship.
That's huge.
So you have to budget at least for 1 or 2 years of unemployment, and a lot of people can't do that. They're almost broke.
Right. So, yeah. Was there any other points that you wanted to cover on this article? I think we went over a lot of them.
Yeah. Oh, well, another thing about the cold cutthroat reality, which people never tell you, is that if you, again, I always tell beginners, don't go for a startup because it's more cutthroat. But if you do go for a startup, and I've had this experience, I've seen this experience, which is startups typically give you they're very harsh, and they give you 1 month to be as fast as the rest of the team. And if you're not as fast as the team in 1 month, you're fired.
Wow. So that's the cutthroat thing that you're talking about in the article. Is it's the start from the startup culture.
Yeah, because they can't. Because as soon as they hire you, and as a junior person, they're losing money on you, and they're under heavy international competition. They're worrying about funding. They don't want to go out of business. So I get it. I get it from their view, and they usually don't have time to train you. I mean,
Right.
they will have some senior engineers who help you out, but you can't ask too many questions.
You're not gonna get a lot of help. You're gonna have to be able to Google things, answer problems quickly, and get results fast.
Yeah, and another thing I realized, like in my final project at Flatiron, was even though we had TAs and teachers there who had experience, it was very easy once you start building a real project to hit a wall where nobody can answer your questions, including the most senior people, including the VP of engineering or the CTO or the director of engineering. They cannot answer your questions. You know why? Because they're not working on your code. They're too busy with other stuff. You have to become the expert on your code. You have to be the main person at the company who is the leader, the teacher of that code. Nobody else has looked at it at that one problem as much as you.
Right.
So you can't be like in school and saying, "Oh, I'll just ask the teacher." No one is going to know. And you have to get used to that.
Yeah, and that's how it is with I mean, I feel that all the time at work. I do get help with certain things, but other things, it's like, the senior team lead is just as stumped as I am, and because of the technology or whatever behind it.
Because
that happens sometimes.
Yeah, because technology changes too quickly. There are too many interacting pieces of technology that people haven't worked with, and there's this like one area of the code base that someone else worked on 4 years ago and no one else has touched. No one has had time to look into it, and now that's your job.
Right. But those are great. This segues perfectly into how to be a kick butt new software. I censored that a little bit, but how to be a new software engineer. And you said in the first point there was no struggle equals no learning. And I think that's really like that kind of goes to the same thing we were just talking about is if you're not struggling through your problems, you're not going to learn. Like those are the moments that you're going to get the most out of, right? Is the struggle and the hard times. Like I just had a thing I worked on for 4 days. It's like, it was such a pain. I wrote a blog post on it. I was like, oh my goodness, this is such a pain. But I learned quite a bit from it, right? And I keep learning each time. So can you touch a little bit on that?
Absolutely. And by the way, those are always very valuable stories to talk about in interviews. Companies want to see that, oh, you struggled and then you overcame the struggle. So absolutely. I will tell you, okay, here's a story. Well, I'll tell you two stories. One story was like, how did I start learning data structures and algorithms, right? I talk about it in my articles. I didn't take a course. I didn't have a teacher. What I did was I just dived into Project Euler, which is a code challenge site that has over 600 problems. And I locked myself at home, didn't see my friends, didn't go exercise. And I did nothing but Project Euler day and night for 2 weeks.
You got super pale.
Yeah,
Started falling apart.
I probably looked like awful, you know. Probably people were afraid of me, uh, and people thought I was dead. But the reason I worked so hard was I was trying to get into Flatiron School. So this was after I had just applied, but I applied really late. So the course, the fall program was starting maybe third week of September, and I applied at the end of August. So I had like 1 month, right? I called Flatiron. I said, hey, do you guys have any space in the fall program? And they thought a minute and said, you know, probably not. We're probably full already, but we might have one or two spots left. And I thought, ah, man, you know, because the next Flatiron course wasn't until February, 5 months later.
Wow, yeah,
But
that's huge.
but I had just quit my job in surgery.
Oh, so you're like, I gotta get on
Yeah.
this.
I'm like, what am I going to do? I'm not going to sit around for 5 months. You know, I have to get this job. So I was really determined. And after I applied to them, I thought, you know, I have to really do something nobody else is going to do. What am I going to do to impress them? And I did a zillion problems on Project Euler. And of course, I didn't know anything, right? I didn't know Ruby. I didn't know what linked lists were. I didn't know like what so all this stuff. I just had to dive into it like the deep end from the beginning. I think that's a much better way to learn than taking a course, you know, having a teacher, doing it the proper way. That's really slow, and my way was a lot faster, and I remembered it because of the emotion, because of my suffering, you know. I mean, I would spend 5 to 8 hours on one problem. I'd be banging my head on the wall. I refused to look at the solution, and I'm like, why is this so hard? Why, you know, I would try to get it to work, and then I would at Project Euler, when you solve the problem correctly, it opens up a discussion forum, and it shows 200 other solutions by people from around the world in 20 different languages. And I would look at the solutions. They'd all be better than mine. They'd all be faster, shorter, more beautiful, whatever. I would steal their tricks, and I would copy and rewrite my solution over and over.
You'd learn how to apply that, right?
Exactly.
Not copy paste as much as, were you copy and pasting, or were you like typing it in?
No. I would have to translate. Like it would be, I would see a solution, or I would look up the solution after 8 hours of struggling. I would look it up, but it would be written in Java, or it'd be in Python, some other language. So I'd have to translate that solution so I'd have to learn that language and then translate it into my language, Ruby. And then I would look at some other tricks people use in Project Euler, and they would name all of the different algorithms they use, right? They'd say, I use divide and conquer. I use greedy algorithm. I use dynamic programming. I use binary search. I would say, what's all that? And I would go look it all up, and then I recode it from scratch. So my point is, yes, it was really hard. It was very painful emotionally, psychologically, but I didn't forget. Like I mastered it. Like I not mastered it, but like I really did stuff from scratch and really like owned it. And that's much better than a teacher just spoon feeding you the answer.
Right, and that's kind of what you talked about in another point was, if you have to wait for a teacher to come along and for you to learn anything, you're not hungry enough to go out and get a software job. I think it I
Yeah.
think it touches on, you know, because you're not going to be able to actually make it work in your software job.
Yeah, you won't survive. You will get fired because companies, they can't wait for you. They will say, you know, hey, we're going to need this. We want to integrate with this API. Can you learn it? Can you figure out how to do it by next week? We're going to switch to this language. Can you figure it out and build something next week? we need to use AWS, or we have this new vendor. We're leaving this partner. We're going to switch to this partner. Can you go figure it out by next week? It's always going to be like that. There's no teacher, there's no course for that.
Right.
And you're going to be the first person at the company to have to do it.
Right. So and you say about this, your degree or certification means nothing. Can you elaborate on that as far as why do you think that your certificate or degree means nothing?
Well, I mean, okay. I mean, if you have a computer science degree, if you have, master's, great. That's fantastic. If you went to a famous school, that's fantastic. Of course, it does mean something and will get you noticed. It will get your foot in the door. Like you will get interviews. Like if you went to MIT, great. That's perfect. However, ultimately it's going to be down to, can you solve the code challenges? Can you do the whiteboard challenges? Can you answer well in interviews, right? Then all that previous schooling goes out the door. And
Right.
I've worked with people who have no computer science degree. I don't have a computer science degree. And I've worked with people who didn't go to college who are lead engineers. So it's not necessary. It's nice, of course, if you can afford it, if you can pay for it, why not? But the point is, plenty of those people get rejected as well. It's not enough.
It's not enough to do that. So another thing I thought would something that I harp on a lot is networking, and I read through some of the your articles, and someone mentioned how networking helped you a lot. Doing LinkedIn and networking helped you a lot. But you touched on, as much as I think getting your foot in the door is different from. I think you're focusing more on the hard skills you're going to need or to actually get and ace and be really good at your job, right? So you still think that networking is important, right?
Yeah, like I know people, like I know I upset a lot of people with my networking posts, because I typically say networking is useless for a software job.
Oh, you do? Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I usually say it's useless for getting a software job. Well, of course it's not. I don't mean completely useless. Of course it helps, but my point is it's useless if you don't have the skills.
And
If you're still mediocre.
So I'll tell you, I got my foot in the door at my first interview. I think it was my first interview because I applied so early to the job. It was for a QA job at a billion-dollar company, or multi-million. It was a fairly large company. I think they had 600 devs there. It was like an SDET job, and I only got my foot in the door because I applied early, right? So that wasn't really networking, but I bombed that interview pretty bad. I had other interviews, multiple other interviews that I had that didn't go well. This is when I was looking for an internship. So this is 9 months into my, when I really started getting heavy into my degree. And I totally resonate with that. So the networking part was great, but the problem I failed on was the technical interview side, right? The hard stuff, like the hard stuff. I even was worse at the soft skill side, but the hard technical interview stuff was where I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know what I'm doing. So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, I always tell people. Well, I always point out to this great interview with Steve Martin. The comedian Steve Martin, the actor. Charlie Rose did. If you look at it on YouTube, you'll see it where he asks, how did you become successful in Hollywood, right? And Steve Martin says, many people ask me this question: how do I make it in show business? And the thing is, they never like the answer that I give them. They don't like, because they want to hear, oh, this is how you meet a director, this is how you meet an agent, this is how you meet these famous people who will give you your big break in Hollywood, right? He's like, no. He's like, it's so much better and simpler to just focus on being really, really good. Be really, really good at one thing. And then people will find you. And then that beats having to go hang out at cocktail parties, right? That's his point in Hollywood, right? Which is a very relationship-driven business, right? Okay. But with software, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to interject really quick if I could.
Yeah.
because I fell flat on my face in my degree. I don't want to go into my background right now. I'll do that in another video sometime. But I fell flat on my face with my career. Nearly lost my job, and I listened to this book called "So Great They Can't Ignore You" by Cal Newport. I
Exactly.
really, if you're listening to this video right now and you're like, I don't feel this. This isn't for me. Go read that book. Right? Go read that book, and that will help motivate you, especially if you've been looking for a couple months for a job, you're going to be like, oh, why am I not doing this? I finally read that book. I was like, holy crap, I can't be mediocre anymore. I told you this before. I kind of just I was mediocre in my degree, right? And I didn't do really poorly, but I didn't do great either. And that's why I don't put my GPA on my resume, right? I think
Yeah.
it was a 2.9 something, right? It wasn't great. But that book changed my perception so much. And
Hmm.
I think you have to have this um uh you know come to this realization through hard difficult times in order to feel like you're going to do any of these hard things we're talking about today.
Yeah, I really like Cal Newport. He's a computer science professor at Georgetown, and I read his book Deep Work, which I think every software person, every creative person should read as well, focusing on how to focus and concentrate. But yeah, he takes the title of his book, "So Good You Can't It Can't Ignore You." They can't ignore you. He takes that title from Steve Martin's interview.
Right, yeah, I
Yeah,
think, yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
um
So
maybe that's
it
why it spurred it in my mind then.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing that I noticed, because like once I started being active on LinkedIn and I put all my skills and whatever, as all software people know, you start getting contacted by recruiters, right? Most of us. But I when I first moved to LA, I was going to all these all these meetups, tech meetups, and meeting all these people. Guess what? None of them helped me for finding a job. Not a single one. Not a single one. I stopped going to meetups, actually. I only go to meetups now if it's like I'm actually going to learn something new.
So
But
you haven't had a good. I've had different experiences, but maybe the culture there with meetups is a little different than it is here.
no, I'm not saying that I couldn't meet someone from a meetup and get a job. I'm saying it's not necessary. I'm saying, like, from me just putting stuff up on GitHub, from doing all the projects and code challenges stuff I do, from me putting stuff on my resume and my LinkedIn, posting about stuff, that's been enough. Like,
Oh, okay.
yeah, my point is that has in itself, and the videos I have on LinkedIn, whatever, that has already attracted a ton of attention from all the top companies. Every famous company, pretty much, I have to say, has already contacted me. Like any company you can think of, like, I mean, in software related, has already contacted me. I mean, even the White House has, contacted me. It's crazy.
That's
The
awesome, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying, like, I didn't go network for any of this. I just stay at home, study, post some stuff on GitHub, do code show. I just do the basic things you have to do to learn. And then recruiters, that is their job. Their job 40 hours a week is to hunt through LinkedIn and search for the gold, right? Whoever is the gold. And they're doing that for you. So if you know how to use LinkedIn properly, put all the right details on your profile, highlight your GitHub properly, all that, they naturally are going to find you. You don't have to. I barely even apply for any companies. Okay. So for example, this last interview sequence where I got the job at Bird, basically it only took 3 weeks to find a job. And once I put there was a profile thing that I put up on AngelList, whatever. In 2 days, like 8 companies contacted me through AngelList, and in about 3 weeks, I interviewed with 20 companies, mostly startups, and I even was turning down companies. I was like, "Oh, I'm not interested in your product." And again, for most of them, I never applied to the company. They mostly all contacted me first.
Yeah, that's the position after I listened to that book, that was the position I wanted to be in too. And I
Yeah.
see that coming as well. Um,
So
thanks
yeah,
for
so
thanks for
so
letting
that's
me interject.
no, but that's my point. I want to keep stressing because I see a lot of new grads wasting energy on networking events. I wouldn't do that because my point is that networking is easy. That's the easy part, okay? Meeting people and going to a party and saying hi on LinkedIn to people, that's super easy. Anybody can do that. The hard part is the months and years you spend building those hard skills, right?
Okay,
That's the
so
hard.
maybe I would tend to maybe slightly disagree and say do it in proportion of what's most important, right? Because
Sure,
I could see that you could finding mentors at meetups would be really important, right?
sure.
That's the type of thing that would be more important. I like that. I like that point of view though. I haven't heard that before. I think that's really good.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. Yeah, if you have people who want to study with you, and yeah, I'm not saying never go meet people. Like, go ahead and meet people, but I'm saying don't depend on that. Because think about like how software companies hire. Because if networking really were that useful, then you if you look on engineering teams, you see a lot of people hiring their friends or family or their boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, right? You don't see that happening typically for engineering teams. Typically, that does not happen. Um, like you could be Mark Zuckerberg's, babysitter. He's not going to hire you for Facebook just because you're his babysitter. So what? Like you still have to pass all the technical interviews. Like there's no way around that. And also, when you interview for a group, you're going to interview, let's say, with 6 engineers. Let's say, right? Let's say 6 people. Yes, you could be friends with one of them, but so what? Like all of them typically have to say yes to you, or it's usually like maybe you can have one person say no, but for the companies I've worked for, it's usually been like all or almost all. Like let's say 5 out of 6 have to say yes for you to get
wow.
hired. So it's not enough to know one person. So what?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a really good point. So, man, we are.
Are we out of time?
No, we're not out of time yet, but I think we
Okay.
should keep
Move on.
moving forward.
Sure.
Um, let's pick one more point from this article and then move on to the ideal boot camp.
Sure.
Um, do you have one in particular? I really like this one about this this you know metaphor or analogy. I always mix those up, dude. Um, uh, where you say, imagine you're a boss from the New York Times. Someone from China meets you and says, "I'm new to America. I just started learning English 3 months ago at Harvard. Would you hire me to be a New York Times reporter?" I thought this was like just so genius. I was like, man, it just clicked in my mind as to why you have to really differentiate yourself. Um, can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, I think it goes into David Heinemeier Hansson. He's the creator of Rails, and he always says that we should we shouldn't be called software engineers. We should be called software writers, because really, honestly, we are writers. Maybe we're telling a story, but maybe it's a boring story, but our language, expression, grammar, love for language, like all of that actually matters. And so if you think about how do I become a great writer of English, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. You can't become great at any language. Like I always say, think of how long it took you to learn Chinese or Spanish or German or English, right? Like it took you years of regular practice. And you weren't just reading student essays, you were reading, Shakespeare, you were reading the New York, the best newspapers, the best magazines as an example for how to write, and you were practicing for years. It's the same thing with software. You can't go to 3 months of school anywhere and become good at it. It's impossible. You could go to the best school in the world, let's say Harvard, MIT, 3 months. It's not enough to be great. You can be mediocre, you can be passable, you can fake it a little bit, but there's no substitute for years of experience.
Right.
And so people don't get that. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I think I think what it is the boot camps, the 3-month boot camps or whatever, they'll get you to the point where a company can keep on training you, but you're not going to be hit the ground running, right?
No, no, you're going to be actually really slow. I was really slow after graduation. I was like painfully slow, and I was just very lucky. I joined a very slow, old bureaucratic company, which let me be slow at first. And they let me work with two senior engineers who actually at the beginning, they would even sit next to me and like say, type this, type this. That's how slow I was. And I was embarrassed how slow I was. But they didn't fire me. You know, that's the nice thing about being at a slow company. If you're at a faster company, trust me, they'll fire you.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
So my point is, think about being a writer. I always say that people who are good at language, care about, you know, who are good editors and good writers and care about that, they have a better chance of being good software engineers. So if you take someone complete inexperienced who's an English major, like I would take that person over a business major, right? Because the English person has been focusing on language and writing and good expression for years.
Right.
So
That's a really good point. I like that one as well.
and
So
it's not just me. It's a DHH, David Heinemeier Hansen, and his co-founder Jason Fried. They run a company called Basecamp, and they always say if we're choosing between two people, we always pick the person who's the better writer for
that's
any
cool.
job. For any job.
I think you linked to one of their articles as well, don't you?
Yeah,
And
well, they have 2 books and they have
okay.
podcasts and everything. Yeah, blog posts.
All right, so we'll have to go check that out afterwards.
Yeah,
So let's move on to your ideal boot camp.
yeah,
So the first part is you say number one is you want to do one language for 2 years. So this means just doing one single language, not one type of language, not like SQL versus C-based languages. You're saying just pick one language, pick JavaScript, for example, or Ruby.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Because and most people, a lot of junior people make this mistake because they confuse you, right? They'll tell you when you're getting into software, oh, you have to learn all these 10 things. There are all these things, and people get confused. What do I focus on? But when companies are hiring you, I tell people it's like you're trying to join a band, but the software teams are very small. They typically, all the software teams I've worked on have had literally maybe 2 to 6 people. That's the size of my teams. Super
Wow.
small. You're joining a small band, you're joining the Beatles. And so they're trying to hire a great guitar player. And if you go to them and say, I use the analogy, I say, you know, I'm a new rock musician. I went to rock musician boot camp. I've done 3 months of 3 weeks of drums, 3 weeks of guitar, 3 weeks of piano. Hire me to be a guitar player. They're gonna just laugh you out of the room, right?
Right.
And I don't care. That's nice, you know, guitar and drums, but I'm looking for, or you know, piano, but I'm looking for a great guitar player. So it's the same with software jobs. You have to pick. Don't try to be a quote full stack person, which is another mistake everyone does. No one's going to be expert on both front end and back end. That takes too many years. Pick one side. Do I want to be front end, or do I want to be back end, or do I want to be mobile? You have to pick. You have to pick one side and stick to it for years and commit to it being really good. So if you're a front end person, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, but you got to master JavaScript. If you're a back end person, you know, pick any of the back end languages, but stick with that. And if you're mobile, pick, you know, Kotlin or Android, or you pick iOS development. And the thing is, when I was interviewing for my first Ruby jobs, they never asked me about Rails, believe it or not. Ruby on Rails. I was going to be working in Rails. They never asked me about Rails, the framework. They just asked me about advanced Ruby.
Right, and people kind of mix those up. People mix and conflate Ruby with Rails all the time.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. Ruby
Like,
is the language that Rails is written in Ruby,
Yeah,
Like Rails.
Rails is kind of like Django, right? For Python, or if you want to call it React, if you want to make a front end example, React
Exactly.
versus JavaScript, right? It's a framework.
Exactly. And I meet too many people who go to JavaScript boot camps and mainly focus on React, but you ask them basic questions on JavaScript and they fail. They don't know how to explain them. Yet,
Right.
yet that's the foundation of everything. So I always tell people, imagine that you own an auto repair shop, and you have two candidates looking for a job, right? And one guy went to auto engine repair boot camp, and they teach him, or her, the top 10 things that go wrong with car engines, and they teach them a recipe for solving that. And then another guy didn't go to a boot camp, but has like taken apart a complete car engine and rebuilt it from scratch, and has studied the physics, some of the mechanical engineering behind it. Like, who would you hire? Of course you'd hire the second guy. Why? Because the second guy knows the fundamentals really well and is adaptable for all the future problems, unexpected problems you're going to have. Those top 10 things that are wrong with car engines, they're going to change next year. They're not
Right.
going to be the top 10 things. And then that guy is going to be lost, you see? And
Exactly.
people focus too much on frameworks like React and Vue and all this stuff. They don't focus enough on the fundamentals of JavaScript, which hasn't changed for decades. React didn't even exist when I graduated from my boot camp. There was no React.
Right.
And by the way, at my boot camp at Flatiron, JavaScript wasn't a big thing. We only, how much time we spent on JavaScript at Flatiron back in 2013? 3 days. That's it. Because it wasn't hot at that time. Node wasn't hot at that time 6 years ago. We
Right.
only focused on Ruby. So
Right.
So my point is, things are going to keep changing. The languages are not going to change. You should focus on the language,
Right.
not on the library.
Um, and because the language will teach you the fundamental concepts of programming as well when you stop focusing on libraries and you focus on languages more.
And also, beyond that, data structures, algorithms, those are
Right.
universal to all languages. They haven't changed for decades. So my point is, focus on learning things that don't change, that
Right.
stayed,
Exactly.
that are true for decades. And also that goes into protocols and standards that the world uses, like HTTP, OAuth 2, TCP, stuff like that. And again, they never teach that at the bootcamp.
Right. Exactly.
But we build all our code on top of that. So
Right. So that's the way to set yourself apart. So the next point was um you have to choose a good book, and work it from cover to cover. We kind of already went over that earlier.
well, one thing I want to say about that is that most people don't know how to study when they study software. What they do is they'll look at the code in the book or in the course or on the classroom. They'll read it. They'll study someone else's code and then think, okay, I get it, and then move on. That's typically how people study, right?
Yeah, but
Uh,
that's not how you work.
that's not how to learn, because you're going to forget tomorrow because you didn't struggle. We remember things when we have emotion behind them. We have to have emotion, strong emotion. So the better way to learn is you look at someone else's code in the book or course, cover it up, open up a file, and recode it all from scratch with no notes. And you do that for every new concept, every new example in the book or the course. And you do that throughout the whole thing,
Cool.
everything from scratch.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks for sharing that one too.
Sure.
So let's move on to, because we
Sure.
are
Yeah, a lot of time.
we're waxing short on time, but so the third point was learning data structures and algorithms. So doing at least 100 problems on HackerRank or Codility, Project Euler, spelled EULER,
Right.
LeetCode, Interview Cake, etc. Right,
Mm-hmm.
and then also get an algorithm book and code every single data structure / algorithm from scratch. So you're talking about maybe Crack the Coding Interview would be a good one to do.
You could do that one, or there's another book that I've recommended for JavaScript. If you just Google, I think JavaScript data structures, O'Reilly PDF, you will find the book for free.
Okay.
So yeah, but I don't know what's the best book. Just find a book and code every example from scratch. Like for example, let's say you want to learn about linked lists, right? You could what you could do is look it up on Wikipedia, look it up in a book. What is a linked list? What's the theory? Look at a few examples, cover it up, and then try to build your own linked list from scratch. And then think, what are some other functions for linked lists that I would need? Right? So you might read about, okay, this is how to add something to a linked list. And then you can think, maybe I need to delete, maybe I need to insert, maybe I need to count the number of items and nodes in a linked list. Right? And so
Right.
without looking at the book, without looking at how other people do it, try to discover that for yourself. Learn by discovery. That's a
That's
much
great.
better way to learn. And by the way, I've been asked this stuff on whiteboards. I've had to do it from scratch. So
So it's
yeah,
really important. And
yeah,
we could go into the argument as to whether people should be doing that anymore, and that's probably a different discussion, but
yeah.
it's reality, right? So
It's
um
reality. Yeah, get used to it. Yeah,
yeah. So start making open source contributions to popular projects on GitHub. We talked about that earlier
we
as
did.
well.
Yeah, I just want to say for that. What do I want to say? What do I want to add to that? Oh yeah. So the thing is, yes, it's scary to do that, and it's very confusing. It will look like gibberish to you, but guess what? That's what it's like actually working at a company. When you start working at a company, they won't say, like for a typical student, they won't say, here, go build this website by yourself and start it from scratch. No one is going to say that. They'll say, here's a project that has thousands of lines of code that senior engineers have worked on for years. And it's like going into the operating room and the surgeon has a patient cut open on the table and is like, here, there's something wrong with this guy's kidney. Go fix it. Like that's what will happen to you, right? So you'll have to dive into this crazy code that you've never seen before, that people wrote years ago, that's super intertwined, and no one will have time to help you. And you will have to go figure it out and fix it in like 1 to 3 days. So you have to get practice with diving into open source projects. I mean, that's the closest you can get to a real job.
So that's why it's going to help you stand out, is because they're going to know intuitively, and whoever's interviewing is going to know, wow, all these different pieces that you might not think about right now as a junior developer or even mid-level. You might not think, oh, well, I have to know all these different things. It's a proxy for you understanding all these different things quickly at another job.
Right. It's showing that you can, first of all, you can read and quickly understand senior engineers' code that you've never seen before. And you can actually, fix bugs and add features and merge with someone else's code, right? And when you make an open source contribution and a pull request, who's going to be reading that code? Typically, who's going to be reading your pull request? It's going to typically be a senior engineer at some company who built that project, and probably that person is going to reject your code, right?
Right.
But when they reject your code, they'll give you advice. They'll say, here, fix this, add a test over here. You could rewrite this, you see? So you're getting these senior people around the world teaching you for free to improve your code.
That's
I
cool.
mean, that's amazing, right?
It's awesome.
And
It's free feedback, right? So
and,
it's free
and then
mentorship in a way.
exactly, they give you feedback, and then you listen, you fix your code multiple times, you send it back, they reject it again, and you do that back and forth until they finally say, okay, now your code is good enough for our company, and then they merge your code into master, you see? And when that happens, you have to brag about it. Talk about it on LinkedIn, your resume, your GitHub, tell everyone about it, because that's super valuable, because that shows that a senior engineer at a company thinks that your code is good enough for thousands of people to use, because that's going to be a popular project.
That's awesome.
And that's valuable. That's impressive. That will impress me.
That
right?
that seems like one that's when I was looking at it, that seems like one that's like it's really valuable to go and do. So I think that's really cool. Um,
Yeah,
so the next point was the 6 points from the Howard Coding Bootcamps week. We went over that for like 20 minutes.
yeah, we talked about that.
And then the how to be a kick butt new software engineer.
Yeah,
Um,
learn X code X from scratch. We talked about that. So
yep.
basically, there's a again, go on my GitHub and there's a link in my articles. I have a repo called Awesome. What is it called? Awesome for Beginners. So those are linked to a whole bunch of open source projects. And if you go into those projects, you go to the GitHub issues, you'll see some that are tagged good for beginners or for first time only, and try those, and you will see the discussion that people have. Like they'll say, oh, I need this feature to be added, I have this bug that needs to be fixed. Go help them, go fix it for them, you know. And guess what, you don't only have to look at open issues, you can also look at the closed issues, the ones that have already been fixed, right? Let's say there are 5 open issues, but there are 200 closed issues. So for your own practice, you could go to the closed issue, see the whole discussion on GitHub, see what other people did, and try to solve it. Well, first try to solve it your way, and then compare it to the actual solution that got merged and learn from that.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
The other point was learn object-oriented programming. We talked about this actually last week when we were on a separate call. You
Yeah.
talked about doing something procedurally first once and then doing it in the OO way. And I think a lot of books just say, hey, they abstract out all the trial and error that took to write that book.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I think this is it's a really good learning principle, is like you have to write something wrong once for like do the brute force way, which is like might think of this like procedural is more of the brute force way, and then object OO is the more elegant fashion, right?
Yeah, because I honestly I didn't understand object-oriented programming, why I needed it at all until I did this exercise. This is something that I learned from launch school. That's exactly what they have you do. So I spent, I don't know, they gave us an exercise. They just say, go write a basic blackjack program, but don't use any classes or objects. Just use methods. That's it, functions, and do it however you want. So of course I did it, and of course it was a mess. My code was a mess because think about it. If you don't have any classes, you're thinking you have a lot of cases where you're reusing code and you're thinking, oh shoot, that's an exception. Oh no, I need an if statement there. So I found out my code was filled with if statements because I had too many exceptional cases I hadn't thought about, and it was a mess. And you can imagine in the future, if you want to take that code and put it in outer space or put it in a casino, we'd have to rewrite. Basically, we have to throw it away and rewrite everything again anyway. You see, it's spaghetti code. So I had to do it the bad way first. Then our teacher said, okay, now we're going to do it the object-oriented way with classes. And I had no idea. How do you do object-oriented design? How do you know what to put in a class? How big do you make it? How do you break? I had no idea, right? They never teach you this stuff. And I had to see him doing it. He did it in front of us. And then I watched him step by step break it up. I was like, oh, okay. And then I saw him, I covered it up, and then I rewrote the whole thing from scratch myself, my way. And then I compared it to his way. And like I did it a couple of times. But that's the first time I thought, oh, that's why object-oriented programming is useful. I didn't know
Right.
until I needed it. And again, nobody teaches you that way. They just say, here's what object-oriented programming is, follow this.
Right.
And so people just blindly follow tradition without seeing the need.
Yeah, that's so true. And so focus on learning things that don't change. You touched on that a bit. So this is talking about protocols, HTTP. You said HTTP 2, just, it's more recent. But all the underlying layers, right? If we think of full stack, there's actually more layers than just, our layers. There's the protocol layers, there's the operating system, there's all these different layers in between. If you
Absolutely.
learn about, I've heard people say, learn about what it takes to do everything between the time you send a request when you hit enter to the time it gets back to the server and back to you again. Learn everything in between there. So you're talking
Well,
about stuff that doesn't change.
absolutely, yeah, because this is stuff that some of this has been around since the 1960s, right? And everyone built on top of it. So it doesn't matter what language you're doing, everyone needs to implicitly understand this stuff. And again, if during an interview you show that like you've never heard, you don't really know basic things about HTTP, even though you know React super well, but guess what? You're going to still use HTTP for requests. If you don't know that, immediately it's the giveaway that you're a foreigner, that you don't belong there. You've never lived in that country before. You see, and a lot of like industries for certain types of software, it's actually built. It's based on top of certain protocols that are international protocols. So everyone in that industry has to know the protocol. So I'll give you an example of streaming video because I worked for Disney and I worked for another startup, a TV startup. I worked in television for 2 companies, and so in television, they use this protocol which was created by Apple called HTTP Live Streaming Protocol. It's an international standard, so every streaming video company is going to use it. Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, whatever, and they expect you to know it and expect you to learn it. And again, school never teaches you this stuff.
Right.
So I had to learn it at work. But if you can tell people, hey, I know I've studied this protocol. By the way, all these protocols, they will create these documents called RFCs. These are international documents that a bunch of smart people from different companies, they got together and agreed and wrote this document. Like, this is what HTTP means. This is what HLS means. This is what TCP means. And these are all the headers you need. This is all like the data format has to be like this. They'll define all this stuff in the document.
Right.
And worldwide, all engineers have to follow this. So you need it for your job, and school usually doesn't teach it very well. So go learn it. And then if you can talk about it during the interview and show that you have experience with this, again, that will already make you stand out from thousands of other people.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for explaining that. So let's transition now into LinkedIn, and like, I guess the question is, how can I get my foot in the door, get people to notice me? And then the other question is, how do you get companies to contact you first? So I'm going to pull up your let's see if I can pull up your LinkedIn.
Sure.
It's actually not letting me. Let's see here. There we go. Are you seeing it?
Yeah, I see it. Yeah. And also we can talk about my GitHub as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about these 2 different things. So for your LinkedIn here, what makes your LinkedIn different from other people's, or the standard person's LinkedIn profile?
Okay, well, so first of all, I have one of my 5 articles is about how to be popular on LinkedIn. So if you go to that, I lay out a bunch of ideas. So, okay, one basic thing that a lot of people don't even do, believe it or not, is they don't even have a profile picture. Something as simple as that. Just having a photo of yourself will instantly get you more popular and get you more hits. Very simple. And a second thing is, a lot of people, believe it or not, don't even have a link to their GitHub or any website that they've made. Nothing. And I'll have to hunt for it. They'll say, "Oh, you don't see it?" And I'll be like, "Nope."
So you could put that under your contact info section here, or you could put it in, you could link to your projects and put it there as well.
Yeah. So it's in if you click on contact info, you'll see my GitHub. Here. Well, yeah, if you click on the about page, you'll see it, but at contact info, you'll see it right there. Like the website, that's under website, that goes to my GitHub.
Are you fine with having your email in here?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, sure. Cool. Yeah, so you can see you can put your GitHub right here, And then you can also put it down here in your about section if you wanted to, right? To
Yeah,
get
and
people to notice it there.
yeah, and I tell people to put it at the top of their about, pretty close to the top, so you can easily find it. So
Yeah,
that's
you
one.
have one right here as well, so GitHub link there.
Absolutely, yeah. Another thing is, let's see. Well, another suggestion, if you look at the top of my LinkedIn that most people don't have, is I have YouTube videos that I made. So you can see I have 4 videos.
Right. Sorry, it's
Oh, right
right
there.
here.
Yeah. So basically, literally, they don't take very long to make, but there are videos of me talking about my projects, some of my projects. I just used I'm on the Mac, so I just use QuickTime, and I just hit record, screen record, and I just record me, uh, clicking through the website, clicking through my GitHub code, talking about what's going on, and demo it like this. I made the game of life in Ruby. You can play it. You can see.
Yeah, I'll just mute it here, but
But yeah, you can see I made 2 versions of the game of life, a text version and a video graphics and sound version. You
and you
can,
did this with TDD, so you're showing people that you know how to do test first or test
yeah,
driven
yeah,
development.
just fast forward it. You'll see. So I have the text. I made the text-based version of Game of Life, and if you fast forward it, you'll see the color, sound, video, the graphics version. Yeah, and in my code, I did it fully TDD. I wrote the test first and wrote the code.
That's
You know?
awesome.
Yeah, and it just takes you literally. It takes like when I made. I have the video for my final project at Flatiron. That was the one that's called Cherry. It literally took me 1 hour to make that 6-minute video. So I just clicked through, me demonstrating. I just hit view, and I clicked on.
I think this. Let's see.
Oh, it's not working.
My bad.
Yeah, yeah. So same thing. I just show this is my GitHub, and I just talk, so you can hear my voice, you can hear my communication skills, my personality. You can
Yeah,
hear, well, I can explain technical things.
yeah. I think this is really a golden nugget of insight you're sharing here. This is a really good idea.
And by the way, this site wasn't fully complete. I still had some things I probably needed to add, but guess what? You didn't know that.
Right.
Because I'm showing you, the perfect examples of everything,
Right.
how it should be used. Again, most people don't understand that. They don't think that a recruiter or a manager or an engineering team, how soon we will get your resume before interviewing you. Sometimes we'll get it 5 minutes before we see you. They'll say, "Hey, Raymond, there's this guy we're meeting. Can you, in 5 minutes, can you can you interview him?" And then we'll get your resume, your LinkedIn, and your GitHub like for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So we barely have time, and most people are not going to spend the time to look extensively at what you've done. They will spend 30 seconds or less looking at your page, looking at your resume. They're just skimming it. So
Yeah.
guess what? They don't have time to download your code from GitHub. They don't have time to hunt in GitHub to see like where should I look at. They're in your zillion files, and they don't have time to set up a new account, login and password, and log in and try your site.
Right.
Right? Nobody has time for that. They're just going to skip it. So why not just make a video of you doing all that in 5 minutes? That way they can share it with everyone, and they don't even have to be technical.
It's a great idea. So would you hire someone that did that then?
I mean, I've barely ever seen anyone do that. Only like I think 2 people who like I've advised have actually done this. In
That's really
in like in
that's
like
really awesome.
maybe 3 people in like 6 years have actually done this. So yeah, would I hire someone? I mean, that would show initiative, right? And not only that, like when I was building that final project, I was actually using a Ruby gem by this guy at a consulting firm in Florida, and it actually had a bug in it. And I found the bug. I told him about it. He actually fixed the bug for me, and put out a new version of the gem. And when I made that YouTube video, I sent it to him. You know what he did? I tweeted about it, and then he actually he was like so happy that I used his gem, his Ruby gem, that he said, "I'm so excited. I actually sent your video to my whole team."
Wow, that's cool. That must have felt really cool to have that happen.
Right? I wasn't even applying for his company. But I mean, you see how easy it is? Just make it super easy for non-technical people to be able to see what you did and hear how you talk and explain things. And again, almost nobody does this. I don't know
So
why.
so just remove the friction from them getting to your you want this is all about marketing yourself, right? And being able easier for people to know who you are and what you've done.
Yeah, make it super easy to see like your code, see who you are in a quick paragraph. Yeah, they make people don't know how to do this. So if, for example, if you look at my about section, you see that I summarize myself in 3 lines.
Where's that at here? Is
Just right.
this?
That's it. That's me in 3 lines right there. You see?
Yep.
Very simple. So you don't have to read the whole page to get a snapshot of me. And then most recruiters, I notice, will always ask you, how many years have you done this? How many years have you done this? I got tired of answering that question, so I just put it there.
So you got all of it here. That's cool. I like
and,
that.
and, and then you can see I update that regularly. So every 6 months or so, I'll update the number of years of skills based on what I've been using.
You
And
just yeah, you wish you could code it in there, right? With the date timestamp.
right.
But yeah.
But you see, so you can see, oh, I've been progressing. I'm not just doing the old stuff. I'm picking up all this new stuff.
Right,
Like
because
like
you
Golang.
use Golang now at your new job, right? With Bird.
That's right. Yeah. That's one reason I took the job, because I wanted to leave Ruby and jump to and diversify. So I have that. I also have links to like some of my most impressive projects, like the 50 problems from Project Euler. I did like all the problems in Codility, those code challenge things. I put it right there so it's easy to find. Also, if you go to my, let's see, what else? If you scroll down, let's see, I have, another thing, one of my pet peeves when I look at people's LinkedIn is they have no description of their job. Their job is empty.
That's horrible.
Yeah, they have nothing.
That's horrible. Yeah.
So, like, if you open up my job for Bird, if you click on it, not only do they say what I work on or a little bit. I mean, I don't say much detail about that, but I say the technologies I do, what I'm supposed to work on. I actually took that just from my job description. I even linked to my job description, so you can see the actual description that I applied to, right? And then I quote a business article that talks about our company and what we're doing for all the business people. So
That's smart.
I'm not only talking to technical people, I'm talking to the general public.
Right. That's a really good way. So that just makes it so that more people understand and can understand who you are, right?
Yeah, I've had a lot of people ask me for help on their resume and LinkedIn, and I'll look at it. I'll look at the company. It'll be some weird name. It'll be like, I don't know, KLG. I'll be like, what's that? And they'll be like, oh, it's just like a construction company. I'll be like, okay, you don't say even the word construction in your description. Are you expecting me to go Google that? Like, you want everyone to spend time and like research all your companies, or do you just want to tell them what it is? You see? So
Yeah.
they make us do all the work instead of just making it easy. Like, describe what the company does in a brief sentence or in a fraction of a sentence. Not everyone is going to know your company.
Yeah, so you need to come in with new eyes or get someone else to go and audit your page and go, what do I do? Right? You could ask people, ask them questions about different sections if you wanted help with that. But yeah, that's great.
And also, you notice I also put like, because I've worked at some like famous startup companies, I'll put like, oh, it's worth this much money, it raised this much value from these investors. And that's just, maybe it's a way of bragging, but it's also a way to like talk about, oh, this is a popular startup. This is how hot the startup is.
I don't think it's a bad thing, right? You have to differentiate yourself. If you're not going to brag, like it's hard. Unless you're
Yeah,
really popular, like unless everyone knows who you are, right? It's like you basically have to brag.
a- yeah, and also like you want to give people a sense of the scale of your company. So if you scroll down like to Pluto, which got bought by Viacom last year, I think, um, for $340 million.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had 18 million viewers a month. So you want to give people a sense of the scale, like, oh, I worked on this thing not just for 20 customers but for like 18 million customers. Like, that is super valuable. You want to say you can do things at large scale.
I like how you put parentheses in here as well to kind of differentiate what you did, right?
Oh
Because it has
yes.
your. I think that's really good. I think I'm gonna steal
Yeah.
that for mine.
Yeah, that's true, because again, a lot of recruiters and most people, you want to make it as easy as possible. Just have it at the top. What is the main language you worked in? Make it simple. Don't make people have to like hunt for it. Mhm.
Right.
A lot of recruiters wouldn't know. They'd be like, "Oh, are you good for this Java job or this PHP job?" And I'll be like, "Well, I've never worked in PHP." So to save that time, just put the main language at the top, I would say.
Awesome.
And then also I would say, if we have some more time, I want to talk about like GitHub, right? So if you go to my GitHub, I can show you.
Why don't
How,
we wrap up the LinkedIn really
oh,
fast?
sure. Okay, yeah.
So the other thing is getting connections. So you have 4,700, 4,300 followers.
Oh no,
Um,
I have 7,300.
sorry,
Yeah,
73. I totally misspoke.
sure.
So you have 7,300 followers. If people don't have a LinkedIn right now, that's a lot of people that you're connected with, right? Most people
Yeah.
have under 500, right? So, how did you get these connections? So followers could be people that you're either connected with or people that are following you that aren't connected with you. But
Yeah.
either way, how did you go and get these people? Because in your article you said you had 5,400 at the time. Now you have 7,300. How many of
Yeah.
these are connections, and how do you find these connections? And how many are just people that are following you that you don't even aren't even connected with? Do you know?
Yeah, actually, I think I've updated that article several times. So probably initially it's probably like 3,000, and then I kept changing that number as I got more connections. Well, what I do is first of all, again, because I know how to use LinkedIn and I know how to put all the right keywords, the hot keywords on my page, all the recruiters find me. So that's the main source of people who are reading me is recruiters. Or it can be CTOs or CEOs from different companies are looking for people. And so just from that, I have tons of people adding me all the time, like on a regular basis. I'll have, and then because I got fed up with my, how boot camps weren't adequately preparing people for jobs, and a lot of people, I started trying to help people, and that's why I wrote those articles. And I tried to read. I would see all these people who were struggling, who were unemployed. So I started specifically targeting those boot camp and new grads to help them out. And because of that, a ton of those people all joined me and added me, from Lambda School, Flatiron, every boot camp you can think of, like all these people keep adding me. So on a typical day, I'll get like 10 connection requests. Like, that's normal for me,
Wow.
from recruiters, from companies, from engineers. Typically, it's usually technical people or these new grads. Like, they're all adding me, and then sometimes I'll add people on my own. Like, I'll look at, oh, who else is out there. They have like suggestion thing. I'll look at like who's looked at your page, and if someone looks interesting, I'll add them. Or just LinkedIn has a general connections page. I think if you just go to my network, they'll show a bunch of stuff, or the general page. So I'll add some interesting people I see from there. So it's kind of all. And then of course, for me, I like to post a lot. I post something every day, typically on LinkedIn, sometimes multiple times a day. But I'm not doing it honestly for popularity. Like, I'm not doing it to be popular. I'm just doing it because, well, I like to write, I like to share, and and because a lot of people have asked me for help, for career help, job help. So I'm trying to get the message out to them. Yeah.
Yeah, because we talked about this before. You don't have anything that you're selling right now, or
No.
you're just doing this to because you like helping people, and that's awesome.
Because I was a teacher for 8 years, and I love teaching, and I know so many people who are broke or almost broke or who've been unemployed for 6 months, a year, who feel desperate, and I feel bad for them. That's one reason I run a study group. I've started a study group every Saturday for 2 hours on Skype to go over code challenge problems. So that's, I'm not charging any money for it. I just do it because I want to, and I want to go through those problems and keep my mind sharp too. But it's
Right.
because of all those things that I do. That's one reason I'm popular on LinkedIn. But I don't like actively seek popularity.
So if you just kind of your secret sauce has been giving back to others. As you give, you get back things, right?
Well,
It's
yeah, try to help people, but also like my number one rule for posting stuff like that, any post, is never be boring. And most LinkedIn posts are really boring, right? They're just people talking about, I don't know, some platitude of the day, some platitude thing that like makes me roll my eyes, or it'll be some like rags to riches story, like, oh, a year ago I was like this and now I'm like this, and
so
congratulations.
be controversial then.
I mean, sometimes it can be controversial, but it's good to have strong opinions and like know what you believe and like back it up. That's all my point is. And yeah, sometimes I can be contradictory, but I'm not trying to be like against people for just to be against people, against boot camps, just to be against boot camps. I'm not against all boot camps. I'm just against the bad ones, right?
Right.
Yeah, no, I have strong opinions, and I try to put it out there because also with bootcamp grads, most of them are too afraid to say anything critical about their bootcamp because they have no power, right? When they just graduate, they're unemployed, they're looking for people to hire them. They have no track record yet. They don't want to say anything bad about their school. And the school puts pressure on them not to say anything bad also.
Right.
So I'm in a position where I don't care what boot camps think about me. I don't worry about them. I can say whatever I want. I have the freedom to do that. That's why I can be critical. But I'm critical in trying to be constructive to make things better.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's jump over to your GitHub now.
Oh yeah, sure.
I got your GitHub here. So you have lots of contributions on here. Not every day, but
Yeah.
this is pretty good for, especially if these are all your own personal stuff, right?
No. This is personal plus company stuff.
So this is personal plus company. So you've got
Yeah.
you can see when you go to some people's, they have like nothing, right? So it's like there's
Yeah.
just nothing on there. So the other thing is to know too is like a lot of people code that don't actually go to GitHub. So like all my contributions for work don't go to GitHub, so I don't get any
Yeah.
credit on my
Well,
stuff either.
well, currently me too. Like my contributions don't go to this GitHub, so you don't see it. Yeah.
Right. But
But
let's talk about GitHub. What did you want to highlight on?
well, okay. First of all, this front page, what you pin, this matters, right? You want to show highlight. So, like, what projects do you pick to show? You don't pick everything. You want to pick. People usually want to know, like, what are the most complicated, difficult things, advanced things that you worked on yourself. That's what people want to know. So, for example, if you have a group project that you did at the boot camp, but you only did like a more trivial section of it, it might not be worth putting because you didn't really build that part of it. I mean, you can put it, but like you don't want to emphasize it. You want to build like something complicated from scratch.
Right.
And so for me, for example, I put the Codility and I put Project Euler, certain things like that, because I know those problems are hard, and companies always ask those questions in interviews. So I put them in the top, in the front. Also, like I highlight those kind of links. The other major thing, so I highlight these links at the top of my resume too, by the way. I have links to like certain projects I've done. So for example, if you go into my repo, can you go to my repo?
Yeah. Which one?
Just go to repositories and then
Okay.
search for Elixir. Yeah, Elixir web server. So this was a web server I built from scratch in Elixir because I was practicing the language.
Cool. That's awesome.
So you see, and I have like, but notice also, so you want to highlight something unusual like this, right? You built it from scratch. Maybe you even tried a different language. It's not a typical thing people would post. Something like that is cool. Something you built from scratch, and it
Yeah,
even has tests.
right, because Elixir's all functional, right? So you're showing a language that most people don't use. Most people are doing OO stuff, um, and
I
no,
have tests.
most people aren't doing web servers, and most people don't have software tests for everything.
Exactly. And you notice my README too. So one of my pet peeves with beginners is their READMEs suck, right? They have nothing on their README. They're empty. Or they just use the default README that GitHub gives you. So instead of that, it's better to like learn Markdown, how to use Markdown, and write a really nice README. Why? Because who's reading your GitHub? It's going to be engineering managers. It's going to be your future teammates at the company who are interviewing you, right? So when they go to this project, how are they going to know what to look at? No one is going to download your code and run my web server.
No.
No one's going to do that. No one's going to configure their computer to run Elixir, right? So I have to put links. I have to describe on the README what is it for and what should you look at? What are the
Right.
main things I want to highlight?
You're guiding people down the path, right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
your resume. Just like your resume, you give highlights of your resume. This is giving highlights in your code and what it's all about.
Basically, like what's the most complicated part of this web server? It's going to be the parser, it's going to be the handler, and the controller. And that's what I link. So take a look at this. And
Right.
so you in a few seconds, you can quickly get someone can get a snapshot without hunting around and know what it's for, you see? And again, most beginners never do this. Never do any of this. You can show, if you could go to one of my other projects, take a look at, maybe I did a React project. If you go to, it was a fish store. If you go there, just look up a React. Yeah, there we go. I think, yeah, there we go. See how I describe it? If you click on it, you actually go to the site. It's a working React site.
So I
So
got that up right here.
yeah, you can visit the store. There we go. You can play
Got
around with it.
multi-factor login or whatever, or not multi-factor, but different ways to log in.
OAuth login. Yep.
Yeah, OAuth.
You can play
And
around with that. Yep. And then if you go back to my
oh, that's cool.
yeah, and then if you go to my GitHub, you'll see like I describe what it is, what it does, and then like here's where you see all the code, here where all the React components are, and then this is the database I use, blah blah blah. You see, basically this is what I would say on the phone or in an interview. I just say it right here for you.
That's great. This is gold. I hope people are gonna take this to heart because this is awesome. I love it.
Yeah, because again, engineers don't think of how to present things. They just think, well, I figured all this stuff out. Like, I'll make you figure it all out. And people don't have time.
Right. We don't have. No one's got no time for that. So, is there anything else you wanted to cover on your GitHub stuff?
uh, Well, another thing was like, if you go to my Codility, let's say, or go to Project Oilers. Yeah, go to Codility, for example. So I have, I've done over 50 problems. I've done pretty much all 17 lessons on Codility, but I also do all these like extra problems. If you see, I don't know, I can't really see the page, but does it say like permutations or something at the bottom where it says,
Permutations right here.
oh, actually, no. Look at Google interview. Look at Google where I say Google. So this is an actual Google interview problem that's on YouTube. Okay, and I linked the YouTube right there. So this is a YouTube video that Google made, two Google engineers made, teaching you how to interview at Google, right? And this is the exact question they asked, but I solved it in Ruby. They do it in C++. But notice how I do the solution. I do multiple solutions. I don't just do one, and I show the output of my code, and I leave a lot of comments explaining different things.
You have the complexity.
Yeah,
The
and
time complexity on there.
exactly. You see, because they're asked that during the interview. And
Right.
again, I tend to put the output of my code because guess what? Nobody's going to download your code and run it,
That's really cool. That's so
right?
smart.
No one has time to download your code and run it and set up Ruby. So why don't you just show the output right there?
That's really cool.
I mean, to me, it's common sense, right? But most people never do this.
I don't think of it this way, and I think this is really valuable. So thanks for showing that as well.
And it's also valuable to show that like you've thought of multiple approaches to the same problem. Most people just show one solution, right? But it's more interesting to say, oh, I've tried this, but this has like a worse big O. And I tried this and I tried this. That shows that you're more mature. You're thinking.
Right.
You're thinking.
That's more senior versus junior thinking there.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's all I would say.
Awesome.
Write a lot of comments, explain things clearly. I tend to go overboard with comments because I'm a writer, but guess what? Comments are for myself too, because I know 3 months from now I've forgotten everything or 2 weeks from now I've forgotten everything that I did. So
Right.
So that's all I wanted to say.
Cool. Well, Raymond, how can people get a hold of you? Is it best just to go to your LinkedIn here? Email. What's the best way to get a hold of you if they just found you organically online and they weren't already connected with you?
Sure. Yeah. Just email, LinkedIn. Yeah,
So,
I get messages right
I'll
away.
show you your contact info again. So this is your
Sure.
Twitter, your email, your
Yeah.
go follow Raymond on GitHub and LinkedIn, all the places. Go and go and go and do that there. So
Yeah, my pleasure. Although obviously I don't have a lot of like too much free time, and people tend to ask me the same questions. So I always just say first read my articles and actually try to follow them, and then
right.
if you have
So
questions, ask me.
okay, yeah. So watch all this video. So
Yeah.
if you have watched all the video or go read the articles and you can learn more, and then if you start getting patterns, you'll write a new article, right? New patterns of questions.
Exactly. I hope I don't have to write a new article, but but yeah. Yeah, and yeah, the thing is, what else would I finally, I guess, leave people with? I don't want to be discouraging. It's very interesting because my articles are pretty harsh. I tell people I'm kind of like Simon Cowell. I'm very like, right?
You totally are. That's awesome.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of, I don't sugarcoat how business really can be, because business doesn't sugarcoat it either. But I also don't want to discourage you. So it's interesting because some people, I'm getting different responses. Some people will say your articles are kind of negative or discouraging. Oh, I'm feeling like I can't do this, do software. But other people, I've had a lot of people recently say, wow, your articles are inspiring. Now I know what to do. Now I have like direction. I was lost. So
Right. So
good.
don't get discouraged by all the don't get discouraged by all the things you have to do. Take one of them and go do them. So just start.
Yeah,
Start with one
exactly.
of them.
Yeah, exactly. But also, I would have to say one more thing is that for some people, unfortunately, I would say, for example, some people unfortunately have to realize after a certain point that they aren't fit to be a software engineer. For some people. And I want to say that carefully because I don't want to discourage people, but I would say, let's say if you've gone through the boot camp, you've done all the studying, you've done all the you've practiced, you've applied to companies, and it's been over a year or a year and a half, let's say, and you still nothing is working. It may be time to think of something else. I just want
Yeah.
to be kind of real with people. It's just like, do you
I
want to be an actor or a singer, right? Or a musician? It's like,
Well, I think if you listen to the book Peak by Anders Ericsson, he talks about if it might not be that you're not able to do it. It might just be that you don't have enough time. You need to put in way more time, and that might be the real problem, right?
yeah,
Might need to put in double the time what everyone else is putting in.
yeah. And remember, this is my second time in software. So I'm not saying, if you didn't work well for you this time, you can never be a software engineer your whole life, right? I actually left and came back. So
Right.
I'm a perfect example. But my point is, I've met so many people. I have friends who are, they quit their job and they invested heavily. They worked their ass off, for like 12-hour days or whatever, and went to hack Reactor or something like that. And then months later, they're still unemployed. And then I call them, like, how are they doing? And they say, actually, I'm almost broke. Or the other thing is, life events will happen. Like their parents, like a family member gets sick, someone gets sick, and they don't have time to study. Or I've known people who were, I knew someone who was a bartender working at 2 bars. Again, almost broke.
So basically, don't live in sanity. You may need to pivot, do something else, come back to this later, or you need to put more time in. Maybe need to get a mentor, but
Yeah.
don't leave it as a possibility that you may need to do a different career.
Yeah, like when it comes down to the point where like you're almost not able to pay your rent and you may be homeless, like I think you should stop and go do the previous job that you did before. Like build
Right.
up some cash and then think about it
Then
later.
maybe try again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey Raymond, thanks so much. I really appreciate really appreciate meeting with you, and I hope we do this again in the future. This is awesome.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much, Tyler. I hope with this video I don't have to say the same thing to a zillion times.
Really, like, go watch this 2.5 hour video and you'll get everything you need.
Has it been 2.5 hours
It's
already?
been 2 hours. That's
Oh
why
my
we did
God.
the too long didn't read version, right? So,
Got it.
all right.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Raymond. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Okay.